Okay, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building, where we are back after an unexpected hiatus of 1 week. Life is very interesting when the kids are in their last week of school. That's all I'm going to say. So this week's topic is what deserves a name, and next week we're going to have Sam J. Miller on the show. So, yay! So that bit of scheduling got worked out. I'm excited about it. And yeah, this was a topic that sort of grew out of our last topic, which was a discussion of naming. And it occurred to me that we name all sorts of things, and that it would be worth taking a look at what we put names on and why we do that. I am one of the first examples that springs to mind as being quirky and modern is Dick Turpin, the car in Good Omens. They make a whole point of the fact that he's named his car, and not just that he's named his car, but he's named it for a specific reason, and he's dying for people to ask him why he named his car Dick Turpin. I think that's a joke from the original book, so it has crossed media. It's not just a TV thing. But yeah, so some, we talked a lot about naming people and places. I've seen lots of people name their cars. I actually knew a guy who named the dishwasher.
I've named my car, so I've always named my cars.
Yeah, we kind of have a name for our car, but we don't use it all the time.
I've never named a car.
And I think the naming of cars and the naming of things in general goes to the idea that you can sit, at least for me, here I am spouting off the deep end, that you consider the person or the thing or whatever a person in its own right, a being with an identity, a personality. That's why it deserves a name.
So it's a sort of a personification process?
Yes, an anthropomorphization, personification. Like, I don't name these magnets are sitting, these rare earth magnets are sitting by my desk, but name a car, certainly, because the car has a personality, especially my previous car, which was a POS and would break down at inconvenient moments. And it really had a really unhappy personality, whereas my current car is much more subdued and relaxing.
Well, we do like to anthropomorphize things.
I am really weirded out by this whole conversation because I come from a very animistic, panentheistic culture, and it never occurred to me to name my cars until my white Western friends told me about their cars having names and looked at me weirdly because I didn't name my car. And I feel like my magnets have personalities, but they don't need a name. Everything has a personality, but it doesn't need a name. Apparently I'm working with a very different paradigm.
Yeah,
the whole thing makes sense, but
it's a completely different paradigm. It works, but it's right. Equally valid. I mean, I do get some looks from some people who don't name cars. It's not universal in Western society, but it's common enough.
So I find this really interesting because I lived on a boat, and boats all have names.
Mm-hmm.
But the dinghy that we used didn't have a name. It could have, but it was just the dinghy.
Now, but what? Now, let me interrogate that. So, why do you think boats should have names? Not that I'm disagreeing that they should, but just asking for the sake of argument. Why should boats have names and not cars?
By convention, the reason why boats have names is that when you are calling the Coast Guard, when you are calling the bridge that needs to be raised across the ICW, when you are calling Boat US for tow, when you're calling other boats, you identify yourself in the same way that we used to have to identify ourselves when we were on the telephone, right? Hi, this is so-and-so. And so you name the person you're trying to reach, and then you name yourself. And there's a ritual of how you enact this VHF radio call.
Mm-hmm.
And you name your boat 3 times in a row.
But 3 times sounds really, really interesting. It's 3 times just for
Well,
all the
so in that case, it's almost like the name is applied because the vehicle is an interlocutor of sorts in an interaction.
And so, boats have names because they're effectively like addresses.
But they're not stationary, like a house.
Which then gets to the fact that, like, I had a friend whose address in England was the name of the historic name of his house, the town he lived in, which was identified as the particular town that was next to this other bigger place. And then I'm sure there was a postcode, but I didn't actually know it. And so his mailing address, as he gave it to me, was his name, his house's name, the town the house was in, and what it was adjacent to. As opposed to having a house number.
Yeah.
And if you look back, house numbers are an urban thing. And names were, a non-urban thing, right? That's such and such house, right?
Well, so houses have definitely had names.
Right.
Yeah. Boats are not stationary.
Certainly,
you can't name them.
Certainly mansions and manor houses and stuff have often been given names.
Castles.
Castles, yeah.
Castles have names.
Because they are the focal points. You name something that's adjacent to the town or the castle.
Now, I have friends who, for instance, name their knives.
Okay.
Not by function, but by sort of the same kind of naming convention that you find in fantasy novels for swords.
Yeah, and people have named swords. My question is, how do we know what tradition has actually named swords in real life?
I am pretty sure there's a Japanese tradition of naming certain swords of note. Not every sword is named, but there are named swords.
Yeah. Storms are like that. Not every storm gets a name. Some do.
True. So I suppose the knife thing, though, would be related to the sword thing.
Yeah, I don't think that so I have friends who name some of their kitchen knives, but I don't think they name every single knife. And for instance, even if they named every sharp knife, I don't think they named their butter knives. Marcation somewhere. And I'm thinking also about like that country inn tradition of naming the rooms.
Oh yeah.
Like in most houses, you name rooms by function, or you name them by the inhabitant. But there's a larger house tradition of naming them by the color they are, or by their supposed Lincoln bedroom or whatever they're supposed to be honoring, right? And so there's
I have definitely seen that.
That isn't named. The red room.
In a large hotel, it's very regular shape usually, and you've got corridors and you've got floors, and they're very regular, and you can number the rooms consecutively, and it makes sense. In a house, and I know that this is older than the numbered consecutively rooms, you're not necessarily going to have a clear pattern of order, of sequence. So it makes just as much sense to say the peacock room or the river room or the green room.
Well, I mean, a lot of those rooms are named after their decor.
After their notable features, right? Because the maid's room is not named anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other way to do it is the third door on the right.
Yeah, right.
I was also mentioning to someone today about the whole street address schema, and Juliet, I don't know how you felt the first time you heard that Japanese street addresses weren't sequential. They were historical. by
They actually, well,
traditional, but by tradition, it was the order of construction on a particular street or in a particular sector, or that's how I understand it. Somebody's gonna.
well,
I
so
hope that's
Japan
correct,
has
but
about, I think it's 3 or 4 different addressing systems,
I'm not surprised.
depending on which region you're in.
Japan to have a much stronger identity as being an empire of many kingdoms. So yes.
And in Tokyo, they actually number they have a district, and within the district, they number the blocks, and then they number the houses around the block. So there may be 0 relation between the number on one side of the street and the number on the other side of the street because they're on separate blocks.
Right.
So it's a block address, not a street address.
It's a block address, not a street address. And people often get confused about my address where I live because we have these massive street numbers and they're non-consecutive. And it has to do with the fact that somehow somebody organized this place by block. But I'm not sure how the organization scheme actually worked. So yeah, it's very difficult to explain.
So I was thinking about the fact that in some houses you'll have people saying the upstairs bathroom or the children's bathroom or the second bathroom. But if you're not an inhabitant of the house or a longtime guest, you may not know what the second bathroom is.
Sure. And in fact, there's a little dispute in my house about the name of the room that is the frontmost room in the house.
Ah.
Is it the family room or is it the front room? We can't decide.
Interesting.
The front family room?
Exactly. Both of them get, basically each of them works, and there are factions within the family of which one we prefer.
Now I'm reminded that somebody was telling me that there's a schism between people who say Sefwa and Sifwa.
I haven't noticed that.
But front room is a location and family room is a function.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. So so to get back to assigning names and the various things we assign names to. So pets,
computers, pets, but not farm animals, not food animals.
Not food animals. So yeah. So what we don't give names to is actually kind of interesting as well. Now I think there is some ambiguity there because some food animals get named.
I
Or
just
potential
feel like
food
I
animals.
stopped naming my devices. They're all named functionally. Where I used to take great pains with the naming schema for my constellations of things that had to be connected to the networks, because when you're manually assigning network addresses, it made more sense to name things properly. And now I don't have names for anything, and I'm realizing that's really weird.
Well, I mean, I have a name for, like, my computer asked me to name the hard drive.
Right.
Yeah.
So I gave it a name, but I don't ever refer to my computer by that name.
I've never had that. I've never heard of that. My computer's never asked me to name anything.
It doesn't really become pertinent unless you're networking them.
Okay.
Or at least it didn't used to 20 years ago, which is when some of us started doing this. Like sysadmins have names for various servers on the system, right? So that you know which one is which.
Yeah. Like if you're gaming in a large scale gaming environment, you go to a particular named server that you have a tradition of going to, or you see particular people on, or whatever.
In the chat bar,
I had a bio that I called Biochu because I had a minor Pikachu obsession at the time, and I really wanted to theme everything on it Pikachu and put a Pikachu skin on it. And then I realized this was my production machine for going to clients. And I really, as a late 20-something consultant, I really didn't think I could take the credibility hit of having a machine that would go choo.
Darn.
I'm still sad about this.
We give because we've always had multiple computers in our house, and sometimes it's hard for me to remember that not everybody does. And And so not only do our computers have names, but we use them
Mhm.
when we talk
Right.
the computers, because we do talk about, what's on Omega, what's on Abby, what's on Tosh, what's on River. But we don't have a house convention. The person whose computer it is names it. And that works for us.
Yeah.
The problem comes if you're working with a group in a company. This is a problem that my husband has faced, is that his predecessors would name computers things like Dave's Mac.
Right.
Okay, that's not really helpful because it doesn't tell you the function.
Yeah, okay.
And it doesn't tell you anything about what it's supposed to do, or where it's supposed to be, or what its role in getting the group's job done is.
Yeah.
So having a system for something like that's professional group is useful.
Mhm.
Hurricanes, somebody official came up with this name, and so, or hurricanes, there's a system for naming them.
Right, and they get retired if they do too much damage, and now
Yeah.
the Weather Channel does winter storms in the same way. So yeah, there's conventions that grow up over these things.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I know of a household where the file servers always had like planetary names, and they were Star Wars fans, and the laptops all had droid names.
Oh, that's funny.
So yeah, yeah, no. What needs to have a name? I mean, my kid gets mad at me all the time. I'm like, the front stairs. And he's like, which ones are the front stairs?
Well, that's partly the question of what's the front.
Right? And he I don't know if he'd be any happier if I use cardinal directions, but I've taken to describing the texture of the entryway materials instead.
Yeah,
So the carpet stairs and the wood stairs.
I see.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it's kind of interesting. My husband's company has 2 marketing programs that run, and they have different names. Like literally, they are Mike and Eddie. So my husband will say, "Well, today I was working on Mike and Eddie." It's like, what? So yeah.
Such revelatory and obvious names. I was just at a sort of a private hospital earlier, and I didn't realize how much I'd gotten used to this sort of big hospital floor striping style.
Mm.
And instead, they had names for the various departments, but like, if you didn't know what you were looking for, you didn't know what name it was. And so I'd had an appointment at a particular place, but I didn't know what the meta name of the wing it was in would be. So when I went to the cafeteria and was trying to wend my way back, I didn't know where I needed to go because I had I had no idea what the naming schema was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'd been able to see a map on the wall at various junctures, I would have gone, oh, right, that's this entrance that I remember, and this thing is over there next to it, so I need to go to that thing. I need to find the big overhead signs that say go to that thing.
Yeah.
But it was just not labeled well because it was labeled for the convenience of the people who are experts in the system as opposed to the newcomers. And they had the same problem in the cafeteria at this place where, like, you would think the trays are over here and the trash is over here would be labeled. Up over
Yeah.
here, the only thing
Well,
that
so
was these are the different food stations in the buffet line.
yeah.
It was
Well,
weird.
you notice that they often name the sections in grocery stores, and they'll put the name of the section up on the wall above, like high near the ceiling. They'll put the name of the, like, dairy will be on the
You can see it from the
wall.
other side.
above all the dairy products.
Which is
That's a
particularly
relatively
useful.
new. That's a relatively new design style in supermarkets, and one I really appreciate.
Yeah, I appreciate it too.
I wish super targets would do that
Mm,
because I get turned around. I used to have the Target planning, like the Target layout in my head memorized from like mumble years ago when I had worked at laying out a Target that was just opening back before there were super targets. But all the super targets for a while were based on having taken over other buildings. So they were all adapted and weird. And then I would be at the back corner of a Target and not know where the exit was to get towards
yeah.
the registers. And
Well,
I really
so
wish they just had a giant thing that I could look up high at, right? That would say registers this way.
yeah. So I think so. We're playing here with a sort of a borderline of what a name is and what what a description is. That's a point that Che's making here in the chat bar, and I think it's useful. But I think there's a sort of a salience criterion that we're working with here, right? So what like why do we name things? Maybe because they need to stand out in a particular way. Like put a label on something because we need to be able to identify it.
Did we
To distinguish it.
Roman naming schemes? Did we discuss Imperial Roman naming schemes during the naming episode that I missed?
No.
No.
We didn't touch that at all.
So what's really interesting there, as I understand it, is that there was a nomen and a cognomen, and there was basically a family name, and then names which were used by individuals within various families of Rome, and they came up with a very short list. So everybody from this household would have one of three names or something, right? And then you would figure out which one of those you were. So all of the I don't remember the family names right now, so I'm going to butcher this all, but like, and then everybody would have certain names, and then there was also the numeric name of which one were you? Were you, Secundus or Tertius or Quintus and Sextus and Septimus and Octavius. And I no longer have this off the top of my head right now because I don't live with Roman history geeks anymore. But the naming that was being officially used for these people was not individuating. It was placing you within your family structure. And then your friends would call you by a nickname that was who you really were to them.
Right. Cicero, we call Cicero, that's his nickname. His name is Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero is basically Latin for chickpea.
So basically, he's, first name, the chickpea, last name.
You name things for their place in your world. So those the complex naming systems, family context, or which is also very complex, with order and cousins and who you're remembering and however all that all works.
Well, I do think one of the things that we did mention last time was that that particular social affiliations get names. And so taking a particular name associates you with a social affiliation of some kind, be it a familial group or a religious group or, I don't know, a caste group or some other kind of social construct. So that's definitely one of the reasons why people will take on names.
Right.
So that's sort of just revisiting for a moment what we were talking about last week.
Right. So I'm assuming we talked about cultures where names are immutable and cultures where names are expected to shift around a lot during life.
Well, we've talked about names more than once. I think that was a topic that came up not last time, but the time before. It's fine. It's worth mentioning. Sometimes your name sticks with you your
Wow.
whole life, and sometimes it changes.
Right.
So, I don't know if this actually is more about naming things. I'm rewatching Eureka, and there's a house named Sarah. Sarah is the job that the guy who named the house worked very hard to get that name to work. To get those letters in that order, so we could use that as a name for the house. And we do that with agencies. Is sometimes people will work very hard to get a pronounceable word out of.
To make an acronym that's catchy and meaningful.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Shield.
For
Yeah,
instance,
exactly.
Yeah. I'm still having a moment of also thinking about the sort of Spanish convention of a bunch of friends live together in one house, and instead of saying Mark, John, David, and Sarah's house, you'll have a name for that household.
Mm.
Mm.
And so it's, adjective house. And so there'll be a party at adjective house. Insert your adjective here. Rather than listing everybody who lives there. And sometimes the names shift with the household members. And sometimes it's the loose grouping. So it's effectively sort of not a line marriage, but like a line roommateage that carries on the name.
There was the house on Castle Street when I was in school.
Right.
And I could not name all the people who lived there, but there was a cat named Surveillance.
I like that. I like
Good name
that.
for a cat.
That's a fabulous name for a cat.
Yep. But that was easy because there weren't that many students living off campus. So,
well, I mean, yeah, dorms get names. I mean, so okay, this actually takes us in a different direction. Some buildings get named for people who have sponsored them, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit different from just awarding a name to a place because it fits.
Yeah.
Right?
So
I mean, because we're very accustomed to seeing company names on things or donor names on things.
Right.
Stadium
Contexts.
Oh God, stadium names.
Yes. Stadiums used to be idiosyncratic, and now they're all just about all corporate, with very few exceptions.
And I keep forgetting which one is which. It's something.
I'm sorry.
Stadium, and I don't know what town it's in. I don't watch enough sports anymore.
The Arts Center off the Parkway near where my parents live, where I grew up, is not ever going to be, to me, the PNC Bank Arts Center. It just isn't. It's the freaking Garden State Arts Center. Just stop with the nonsense.
Well, so like, for example, when I went to Stanford, my first year, I lived in Florence Moore Hall, right?
Was it called Florence Moore Hall by anybody other than the tour guides?
Nobody calls it Florence Moore Hall. They call it FLOMO.
Right.
But Florence Moore Hall, aka FLOMO, had 7 different dorms as part of it.
Oh, wow.
And each one of those had a name.
Right.
And they were named after, they were bird names in Spanish.
Okay.
So the one I lived in was Alondra, which is like lark in Spanish.
Right.
And there was another dorm called Loro, which is, loro is parrot in Spanish.
Right.
Right. So once you get depending on where you go, you can get these really complex, multi-layered naming strategies is what I'm trying to say. So this is just, it's an opportunity for a lot of fun. You have to go easy with names in a secondary world on a certain level because there's only so much a reader can memorize at any given point. On the other hand, if you wanted to invest some time in setting up a complex naming strategy, it could be really cool.
I'm thinking about the fact that some elevations get names and some don't. And it's very much relative to how much else there is around of that elevation. So, like, in a very flat place, something that's 200 feet high might deserve a name.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And someplace else, 200 feet is just a ripple. And it doesn't have a name. Like, the particular hill my mother lives on doesn't have a name. There's only a name for the whole range.
Mm.
Yeah, and in some really wilderness not densely populated areas, even lots of the mountains don't have individual names, just the tall ones. So yeah, it's all a matter of
The
scale.
tallest. Like, what's next to Mount Whitney? The Sierras. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
and some of that, I'm not clear how much of that is colonization and how much of that is convention.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Eiger and the Jungfrau are right next to each other, but they're very distinctive shaped, really
Yeah.
big, craggy, highest points right there. So I think that naming the highest point is very common. But yeah, at what point do you stop naming the lower things?
That's
And
interesting.
also, what size community has a name?
Mm.
And what kind of name does it have?
Well, you know, and we also in my area where I grew up, there were several districts that were not officially towns but had their own names, right?
Unincorporated?
Unincorporated areas that were known, like, for example, Live Oak
Right.
was a very particular area that you could identify the boundaries of, but which was not an incorporated area from the point of view of the state.
Chicago has a lot of named neighborhoods, which are just Chicago, but they are very distinct neighborhoods. And I did not know when I moved to where I am that it was not just a neighborhood, it's actually a different political and governmental entity.
Mm-hmm.
And because it wasn't obvious to me from the outside. I didn't understand this until I was trying to access services, and then I was like, oh, no, you're from over there. That you're not part of us.
Huh, how
And
interesting.
so that was a really interesting distinction because I could not see the difference.
Well, you know, when communities are all running together, it can be tricky to
Right?
tell.
Yeah, the 5 boroughs in New York City.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in LA where we have distinct little small cities within Los Angeles, but a whole lot of Los Angeles is just unincorporated LA County,
Mm-hmm.
which has a neighborhood name and a postal, you have a post office, but other than that, there's, anything governmental, you have to go to some separate, further in entity.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
And so there's a question when you're world building of which model are you going to adopt?
Yeah.
And I think there's I often see in a lot of secondary world stuff where all the sizes are consistent. And
Yeah.
the little sizes stack up really neatly. And it completely belies the way that medieval Europe had duchies that were tiny and like principalities that were like smaller than counties and other things. And so relative sizes actually doesn't have anything to do with political clout necessarily.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of historical wrangling that changes the size and importance of things and the power that things have. Vatican City is
like
really
the Vatican.
small.
Yeah, exactly.
The names you choose for your groups and your locations can tell you something about the history of people who live there, and if you're
I want to
having
know
them different because some different group settled that area, but now you can't tell except by the name.
Yeah.
I want to know when we started naming cars to go back to cars. I'm not sure that people were naming their stagecoaches and wagons.
Huh. That's an interesting question.
I mean, when you're playing Oregon Trail, your Conestoga wagon doesn't have a name, right?
Well,
but it's
for that
a
matter,
prairie.
When did people start naming boats? Because it was well before the electronic communications that you were talking about.
Isn't isn't Odysseus's boat named?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's a ways back.
Yeah, right. Because the Argo was named.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how this works.
Let's
Well,
see.
I think lack of consistency is definitely something to be expected.
I think possibly deliberately building in lack of consistency is a world building reality check.
Honestly, I think that's true. That's actually one of the things that I work very hard to achieve is not to have consistency across the entire play.
I meant to do that.
No, seriously though,
I'm not joking.
my rule of thumb in the Varn world is whatever is true for this group of people cannot be true for any other group of people necessarily. It might be true, but it might not be true. So
coming back to what Anne Leckie said about how to pronounce the name of her empire.
yes, exactly. Have you guys heard this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, this is wonderful. So if you ever ask Anne Leckie how to pronounce RADCH.
RAADCH.
RAADCH. Sorry, I missed an A. No, I think it's RADCHAAI, actually. But anyway,
I'm going to go look it up now.
regardless, I have it here. Point being, it's
Yeah.
RADCH with and then AAI for the thing, for the adjective, I guess. So
Did I
she
hype
says
it?
that there are so many different peoples in this empire that any possible pronunciation that you could come up with is probably used by some group of people within the empire.
Okay, apparently I come from the alternate universe where that has an extra A in it. I'm really glad to be corrected and on the internets in front of everybody. That's awesome. I loved her use of doubled vowels so much that I added one to her empire name. Awesome.
It happens.
Well, you know what? There is a double vowel in the empire name when you when you use the suffix. So
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
in any case, yes, I always loved her attitude towards that.
like somebody pronounces it that way in that world. It's fine.
Exactly. There are just millions of people in this empire.
So
Is that part of the recorded dive into world building episode with Anne Leckie? I think it is, but
I actually think it might be. Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, so yeah. Actually, I want to bring up another thing. And this is sort of tangential, I guess, but capitalization, because it's a thing that happens so often especially in like science fiction and fantasy, right? The city with a capital T and a capital C, or just a capital C maybe. But like there are lots of things that get capitalized for a sort of importance as though something is being given a name, right?
mhm.
And so I think it is related to the question of naming and what deserves the name. Even though, yeah. Does that make sense? I find that it's really hard for me to decide when to capitalize something and when not to capitalize something because over capitalization is really easy to do.
I'm trying to remember whether Herb Cain ever capitalized the city.
Okay. People who live on the East Coast in the Northeast, focused on Manhattan, will refer to it as the city.
Yes.
And capitalize it as though there is no other city in.
Is it
Yes, with the capital C. I lived on Staten Island, and everyone would talk about I have to go to the city, and by mean that mean they didn't mean going to
it
Brooklyn.
would be city with the capital C, but not with the capital T, right?
But is it the city in capital letters in your head when you're saying that?
Yes. Gotta go
In
to
our
the
area, San Francisco is the city.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Like
there's also,
nobody would say the city here, and it would, be referring to New York.
no. Anybody who says that is clearly a transplanted New Yorker who needs to be browbeaten.
Right?
Hey now.
Adapt or, well, okay, you don't have to die. I had a problem with the terms the South Bay meaning different things depending on where I was,
Mm.
and also the Valley meaning different things based on where I was, and also the industry.
Yeah.
And the industry, I think, I'm now completely flummoxed about when it's capitalized and when it's not in those particular usages. Because
Yeah.
the industry means Hollywood in some places, and it means Silicon Valley in other places, and it means Boeing Aerospace in other places, and it's very specific, or or Detroit in the car industry, but it very definitely used to mean the local economic powerhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much it still means that a lot.
I had a whole thing about when to capitalize librarian in a book recently, because they're specific magical librarians who are part of the library guild, and then there's just mundane librarians who are just regular librarians. So then I had to decide, when do I capitalize librarian or not? And then when I was editing it, I forgot what I decided, and I started capitalizing it all over. And now I have to go back and fix it because I forgot what I had.
Note.
Fun. Yeah, fun.
We have a file called style sheet and conventions, and yeah, this is a pet peeve.
Yeah, the copy editor in me is going, "Where's the style sheet, please?"
Yeah. Well, actually,
terrible.
So we do have the question of capitalization with things like family members. So, like, my mother should be uncapitalized,
Right?
but mother used as a name should be capitalized.
My kid has taken to calling me mother, which has led to me calling him son. And the way I pronounce it, I'm not sure that there isn't a capital N at the end.
So we do have, I think that is very likely to be a link or a key link in the reason why we capitalize things that we consider to be important. Like if we're considering the name of the thing to be a name, then we're more likely to capitalize it. But I had to go back and forth about whether to capitalize lady across the board or just when it was used as the title lady so-and-so, right? And in the end, I decided, no, it's not capitalized across the board. It's only capitalized the context of lady so-and-so.
In the chat, Shay notes that government bills get names and often capitalized and
government bills, yeah.
Obamacare, for example. That's not the name of the bill. That's what everyone calls it now. Yes.
Well, and a lot of the bills are horrible acronyms that they think are funny, sort of. It's like weird government humor.
Yeah.
But it's like, you'll notice where they do really bend over backwards to make it like some kind of, like they do really try hard to make it an acronym.
When did we start when did American civilians start referring to military actions using their military code names?
Oh, military actions with names. That's interesting. Yeah. Like Operation Desert Storm, that kind of stuff.
Was it Desert Storm?
Well, I don't know. It's just one that occurs to me off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think Desert Storm is really where it started.
I feel like Desert Storm was where we were starting to encourage that.
Well, I think that's because it was, honest to God, like it was advertised on the news. It was almost like PR.
Yep.
Well, so yeah, it's almost like a product that you have to promote, right?
Tonight at 8, Desert Storm.
Yeah.
That was totally what it was like.
Yeah, yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
They want if you want people to talk about something, you give it a name.
Yeah.
If you don't want them to talk about it, you don't talk about it. You don't make it easy to talk about it.
That.
And it's not just names, it's that.
Yep.
terminology.
Morgan's got it.
Yeah.
That.
I mean, we do
How
not have
easy is it to
words.
say that.
Hmm?
How easy is it to talk about that? Yep.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have words in English for your non-binary child. We have son, we have daughter, we have the generic child and offspring and spawn, but son says something about the gender of the child, and daughter says something about the gender of the child, and non-binary isn't a lack of gender, it's a gender, but we don't have a name, a word for talking about those children specifically, which is why I will talk about my kid and my daughter. They're two different people. But I don't have a word besides kid, child, spawn, offspring, or the kid's
want
name.
to promote the word queerling. That works more for some people than for others.
Yeah, but the other thing is that is not a gendered name. It's not specifically gender.
No. What I'm saying is that for some people, non-binariness is a concrete gender, and for some people, it's a neither this nor that, and not a
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's new gender
so
fluid.
that particular term is a difficult umbrella.
Yeah, and you could have terms for in kids who are gender fluid, kids who are non-binary. Yeah, it's complicated. But if we wanted to talk about it, if we wanted to think about it, we would have the language.
Well, I think that's what we're doing right now, actually. There's a great proliferation of vocabulary.
Yeah.
Right?
We used to have difficulty talking about cohabiting without marriage. And there were all these words that were being floated in the 80s when the census finally acknowledged that particular style of life sharing. And people tried to make Postle Q a thing.
Oh, I remember Postle Q. No, it didn't really.
Postle Q was only ever a joke.
It
didn't. You know, and the fact that people don't say friend as often as we used to, it stopped being a thing to obfuscate as much.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of new vocabulary being applied to this sort of region, and we're trying to sound out what the boundaries of these regions are, and there's a lot of variation. So right now there's a sort of a proliferation of different words that we're using. None of them have been around nearly as long as these ancient words like son and daughter. Right.
One of the things that bugs me, though, is that there are languages that do have those words.
Yeah.
And I can't use them. They're not my languages. It's not my culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there are a lot of terms being floated around. If somebody has seen terms specifically for relationships between parents who do not throw their children out of the house, that they can use for the kids that they have decided not to throw out of the house for being not sons or not daughters. Because I'm one of those really peculiar parents who, I love my kids, and I can get very angry with people who decide that their child is not exactly what they wanted, so they're going to throw it out of the house. So that might be showing a little bit. But that's the thing, is that you say my son or my daughter, you say that with some pride.
Mm-hmm.
It's mine. This child is mine. I am acknowledging and bragging about my connection to this child. And so that word
I'm finding it interesting, and this is going slightly far afield from naming, but
Yeah,
that
it kind of is.
I had been using much more gender neutral terms to describe my children. And because they are being misgendered and because they are affirming ends of the binary for themselves, I have gone back to using the very gendered terms as a reclaiming for the way that they are experiencing erasure, which is one of these interesting things happening while we are normalizing the use of, for instance, them as an indeterminate pronoun for people who've not specifically specified special gendered pronouns for themselves, right? That if you don't know for certain somebody is he or she, use they. And yet that standard ends up erasing trans people who are very much attached to not being they'd.
Mm.
And so we're in the middle of a very difficult place of, do you name somebody's gender? What do you name about somebody?
Mm-hmm.
And I keep seeing people who are trying to come up with a gender neutral honorific suggesting that we use the term citizen. And that just makes me cringe because it's dividing along a different line of inequality.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
You
Okay,
may not
so I'm
be-
afraid, guys, that this is getting
Yeah.
very fascinating, but also straying very far afield, and it's after 5 p.m. and I have to run today. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for this great conversation. We're going to be talking with Sam J. Miller next week. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm going to stop the broadcast and bow out relatively quickly. But you may continue to speak amongst yourselves should you so desire. Thanks.
Okay.